cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. By the way, this episode is also available as a video on our YouTube channel. Just search Energypreneurs. Thank you for joining. Hi, Ned. Good evening from Manila.
Hello, and good morning from Cincinnati.
Wow, the other side of the world, literally. And
Yeah.
we are able
Yeah.
to do this free. Amazing world we
Yeah.
live in, no?
Yeah, it is amazing. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, no problem. Tell us a bit more about yourself, what you have been doing.
I am an engineer and an enthusiast of electric vehicles and all things electric for a long time running. I've been an EV owner for 10 years, and I've been working in EVs for almost 6 now in various different roles, helping companies figure out how to charge EVs and make EVs work for their customers, mostly fleets. Right now, I am a test engineer with Lincoln Electric, and I help put together incredibly tough EV charging stations. It's funny, actually, I worked as a welding engineer before I got into EV charging, and Lincoln Electric has been making welders for 130 years. And there's no connection whatsoever, actually, between those two. I worked with Lincoln in my welding career previously, and then complete gap. And now Lincoln is making EV chargers as well as welders. And I found my way into their organization. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, tell us a bit more about EV charging, because I saw that you have been dealing with 500 kilowatt, up to 500 kilowatt chargers. Now, I read that BYD has now 1 megawatt charger or someone else. How far can we go? This can fry the whole thing, no?
Yeah, the sky's the limit. I am really behind the idea that we need to electrify everything. And when I was working on these half megawatt chargers, those were a pretty early product from Proterra electrifying transit buses. And those transit buses had very short range. In this early day, they were maybe only 30 miles of range, but they would charge at a half megawatt in order to be able to complete the route. So they would pull into a transit station, they would dock with the proprietary technology that had been put together, and they had lithium titanate batteries that could really absorb almost all the current you could throw at them. And then they would go on and do their route. Now, lithium ion batteries have gotten better in density to where that model isn't necessary anymore. And as you mentioned, you fry the grid a little bit when you have a load come on at half a megawatt for 5 minutes and then go away for half an hour. Well, we need to build some resiliency into our grid if we're going to be charging things like ferries. There's exciting things going on in Europe. I took a ferry last year that charged at, let's see if I can remember. I think it charged at a full megawatt and had 2 megawatt hours of capacity on board. And these are the kinds of charging powers we're going to need to electrify everything.
Yeah, that's a serious load, 4 megawatt, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's the power of electricity. You can make that kind of thing happen.
It's amazing. I remember getting into a bus in Shanghai many years ago, more than a decade ago, but that had some sort of something connected from top. Maybe those are capacitors, not necessarily batteries. And it will go from one distance to another, a few hundred meters.
Yeah. The flash charging technology is really interesting. And also, I saw some really cool buses in Shanghai some years ago. I went there in 2019, and it was really incredible. Even in that time, these were absolutely everywhere on the Chinese streets, and not just 2 and 3 wheelers. They had electric buses and taxis and trucks all over the place in 2019. It's wild. And so they also are leading in a lot of ways, of course, but even with these capacitor, super fast charging buses with a pantograph, they'll charge at each stop. There are lots of different solutions that are necessary. And it seems like China has not been shy about trying out that and battery swapping and every kind of technology to make electrification work.
Yep. And then also China has that induction charging continuous on a road strip. That's also, I think, Germany been working on, or can you give us a bit of more?
I don't really know that much about that. I think that China has not been shy to explore all kinds of technologies. That is one where, as an engineer, I really get anxious about putting all the expensive hardware under the road where the trucks are going to be rolling over it and everything. So the pilots that I've seen for that, I think, have not typically been super successful, but it does take some boldness to see what will stick and what won't. Maybe sometimes they'll surprise you. And we're going to have to try a lot of different things.
Yeah, especially if you are trying to charge below under the ground for a megawatt or something, you're really worried about EMR and everything else.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of energy. I've seen some successful projects with stationary wireless charging under the road, and that has seemed to work well as a transit agency approach. But everything has its trade-offs, right? I grew up in an area where we got plenty of snow and the salt was on the roads all the time. And really, I'm afraid of what happens when you have trucks and salt and everything in that environment. But people have made it work.
Yes. So when you say electrify everything, is it only transport or everything? What's your view on electrification? Can you clarify a bit more?
Sure. Yeah, I am deeply committed to the idea of decarbonization. I see the need for us to reach net zero for the health of our planet. I'm 100% compelled by the concept that the planet is going to enforce these boundaries on us, regardless of what our politics say. And the laws of physics dictate that if we want to have a healthy planet in the future and for our children, we absolutely have to be careful about what we're putting into the atmosphere. And we can't just keep pumping it full of geologic quantities of carbon and other greenhouse gases and expect it to continue absorbing that forever without consequences. As difficult as it will be to achieve zero emissions or net zero emissions across, yes, the transportation sector, but also agriculture and land use change and the way we get our stuff that we need. If we don't reach net zero, the consequences are going to be real and dire. And as a parent, I feel that there can almost be nothing more important than giving the next generation a habitable planet to start on, like we received. Yeah, transportation has some use cases that are going to be incredibly difficult to electrify. Intercontinental aviation, in my mind, still an open question if that's going to be possible to do with anything other than a fuel and combustion. And the solutions that are out there to do that without fossil fuels aren't ready yet. So these difficult to electrify applications like aviation, progress is certainly being made, and that's exciting to see. But we're going to need to have a whole variety of solutions or just change the way that we do things in some cases in order to just live within the boundaries that the planet has for us.
Yes, aviation is a tricky one. I think the short haul flights, maybe the technology will be ready in the next few years because you see a lot of things for the smaller planes, right? But unless someone can bring Ben Franklin back and tap into a cloud, sitting in the gigawatt hours on a cloud and you're flying through, so there must be a way, no?
Yeah, I'll be hoping for that. He'll come back and bless us with some kind of incredible inventions because we're going to need some really cool tech to make a lot of these applications work.
Yes. So yeah, aviation is one big question mark, but the ferries, I think there are a lot of ferries are being tried out globally.
Yeah.
Electric boat somehow is not taking off yet. I don't know.
Yeah. There's been a lot of really cool work going on in the Nordics with electric ferries. Of course, everyone has seen the incredible progress that Norway has made being an early leader and also facing some really difficult geography. You know, you can drive up the coast of Norway and it'll take tens of hours less if you use their ferry system instead of making these wild detours around the fjords. And so they've had a system of operating ferries for decades. And they've really been pioneering putting in electrification on those. I rode one last year. It was really incredible. It was a tourist ferry, but there's a lot of really practical ferries running all over Norway and the Nordics. And the size of these is just immense. These are bringing semi-trucks across the Øresund Strait and providing real practical, I'll say, carbon reduction because these ferries are burning tons, literal tons of diesel and bunker fuel every day. And I'm happy to see how much progress has been made in reducing that demand.
We forget that part, exactly what you just mentioned. The amount of energy that gets spent around just to carry the fossil fuel around, right? The coal or oil or even gas at right?
Yeah. It even needs energy for its own transportation.
Yes, and forget the drilling and other part. Just transportation is huge. And then the inventory, that's what IEA was established, just to count the inventories, right?
Yeah. I heard a really interesting statistic one time, and I believe these statistics are no longer available, but the amount of electricity that it takes to refine a gallon of gasoline is astonishing. And we don't get those stats anymore. But there was a really interesting piece on that I saw a long time ago from Robert Llewellyn talking about just how far you could drive on an electric car with nothing but the energy avoided by not refining the gasoline that a gas car would have needed. And it was astonishing to see just how much electrical energy fossil fuel production uses for transportation, fuel, or anything else.
Yeah, because you get the net out of a mine. Nobody tells you how much they used in the mine itself, right?
Yeah, that's true.
You always get the net. Now, coming back to electrifying everything, the planes, then the boats. What's your view on home batteries? Have you thought about that? That can change the world in a very big way. Australia threw in multi-billion-dollar subsidy for home batteries. So views on that?
Yeah, I have to do a little bit of an about face on home batteries because a few years ago, I was a bit of a skeptic saying, hey, this will make sense in certain applications in the Californian market where there are demand charges, time of use rates. It can make sense for people to load shift, but at that time, batteries were expensive enough and production was constrained enough that I had a hard time seeing home batteries as being the application where we would both see and need as much deployment as we have currently seen. And so I've reversed my stance on that, where even though I used to be not very optimistic about home batteries, the performance of batteries on the grid, both in homes and grid scale battery deployments, has absolutely blown me away. The quantities of deployment we've seen in places like Australia, where the solar production is just off the charts, and what China is doing, the graph of Chinese solar installation is just mind-boggling. And the way that batteries have really risen to the challenge, and battery producers have just absolutely opened the taps for how many batteries we're going to get on grid. It's been incredible to see. So I've got solar on my house, and I didn't get a battery installed a few years ago when I put it on, but now I'm looking at going back and saying, hey, this could make sense. Cincinnati isn't the sunniest place necessarily, but seeing the uptake for batteries on the grid and locations with a lot of solar generation is really encouraging.
Because batteries, I have a battery in my house in Melbourne, gives you a different level of comfort that, yes, I have a day's worth of supply sitting there. Yes, we need to tap into. And then, of course, you sell the back into the grid and you get a tiny amount, but you
Sure.
import it back at a very high price. If you don't do that, then you're suddenly saying, wow. Notion of free electricity, although it's not free, but zero marginal cost. This is huge psychic value
Yeah,
on top
definitely.
of
You
the
know,
physical value. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of keeping your own lights on in case of some kind of disaster is just this immense benefit and comfort. I've got a EV that will do vehicle to load, and just knowing that I have a great big battery in my garage in my car, that if I needed to, I could plug in my essential loads to that. It gives a great sense of comfort that isn't there as a side benefit when you choose an EV versus a fossil vehicle. Knowing, hey, if lights do go out, I've got a couple of days worth of power in my car.
I interviewed someone the other day, and he was saying that he has this induction cooktop that he used to camping, and it can drop to 3 kilowatt or whatever the induction cooktop needs from the battery. It's a tiny battery, but it can 3C release or something and works perfectly fine.
That's great. Yeah, I've got the same thing. I need to go digging around for it a bit, but I also have a cooktop, and just with the basic vehicle to load outlet that's available on my Kia with an adapter, I could run some extension cords around and keep our Wi-Fi on and run the microwave, run the induction cooktop. And that just coming as a side benefit, a little extra bonus of having an EV because it's such a common feature these days. It's just a really neat option.
Yeah, but what do you tell? You have been a user for more than 10 years, EV. Of course, you are bold at that time. There's so many misconceptions out there and so many myths, this and that. Still, they're out there. So what do you tell those people? What have you learned, of course, in the 10 years?
Sure. Yeah. Mostly I tell people, hey, come on in. The water's fine. I found my way into EVs just from pure undiluted enthusiasm and interest and the technology of electric power. I was interested in radio controlled vehicles when I was young, and that's how I developed my fascination with electricity as just this invisible, almost magical force that would propel this RC car or an airplane or now drones everywhere. And just the amount of power that was available, even in that time, from a motor and a battery together was just fascinating to me. And so I found my way into EVs just out of interest in the technology. But along the way, I developed a understanding what's happening with our environment and a deal of concern about how air quality is impacted by fossil fuels. And not everyone's going to have the same motivations when considering what benefits of electrification are most meaningful to them. But I have found a lot of traction with just the idea that this is just a lifestyle enhancement. It's just an upgrade to not have to worry about all of the different demands that operating a fossil fuel vehicle makes of you, to worry about all the maintenance that's required when you've got components that are reaching hundreds of degrees and being coated in hydrocarbons, and keeping that in your garage. If you think about how wild it is that it might be normal to store tank of carcinogenic, potentially explosive fuel in your home where you sleep, if someone was pitching that as the new technology, no one would accept it. And so whether it's that or domestic energy security, or local production of energy, local air quality, the benefits and running costs, there are just so many different benefits of electrification. And in talking with many people over the years, I can happily say there's been a number of people that I've convinced to go EV because there's been some benefit or another that applies in their situation.
Yeah, exactly as you said. I think there is video floating around on the internet, which is basically saying that ICE cars are baseline. We are trying to introduce, had it been the other way around, that electric cars are baseline. You charge at home and you're just trying to sell someone saying, oh, by the way, you have to go somewhere else to get this. It's hilarious when you think about it. If the baseline was electric, how you try to sell an internal combustion engine car.
Yeah. And it's a paradigm shift. There are things that we've been raised to accept as just the normal part of doing business with needing to drive somewhere. And that means you're storing dangerous, flammable hydrocarbons in your home if you're parking in a garage or dealing with dispensing them. And that inconvenience or that risk doesn't seem to cost very much in most people's minds. And there are some trade-offs, of course, that come with going electric. People always worry about the family road trip, the once a year drive or the couple of times a year drive going somewhere. And having driven all across the country in electric vehicles from Utah to Ohio and down to Florida and back in EVs, of course, it's a little bit different. It's a paradigm shift. Everything from going from fossil fuels to electric is a paradigm shift. But when you spend enough time in the electric paradigm, you realize that these trade-offs are definitely a net benefit for almost every situation. There's some outlier use cases where the refueling time, if you want to put it that way, has an outsized impact. But by and large, almost every use case has just so much to benefit from electrification.
It's the other way around as well, because people worry saying, okay, if we go long distances, the charger won't be here. But I remember driving from Darwin to Kakadu National Park, basically there's nothing in between. It's about 400 kilometers or something. You top it up. But if you go for EV, it's very easy to set up a solar charger every 50 kilometers if you want to, because no one needs to be there. If you put a gasoline station, someone has to come and fill it up, right? That's why it's none there, because economics doesn't work out.
Yeah. And even with limited resources where things are not populated or very rural areas, one road trip I did one time back in the early days was through the desert of Utah. And it still is a highway in the American West. There are services there, but it's pretty remote, pretty sparse. But at this time, my EV was a Volkswagen e-Golf that had only a 24 kilowatt hour battery. And you'd be very lucky to get 80 miles of range on it. And so it was a little bit of a bold choice to say, hey, I'm going out into the desert. I've checked the map and it's technically possible. I think I'm going to do this. But it's also a different feeling to just be leaving that last kind of exit of the city behind you and say, here we go, out into the desert. And it was fun. There was no problem. There were enough charging stations that I was even driving past some and making my way there. And hey, it was an adventure and I made it without any issues.
Yeah, good. So what's your view then on autonomous vehicle now that you have done so much electric vehicle driving for 10 years? Once you get used to it, once you start relying more and more on the technology, because electric car is completely technology driven so much.
Yeah, with autonomy, I really think hard about the data. And I think we can look at the data now and show us that the autonomous vehicle fleet is safer per mile driven than a human driver is. And human drivers get distracted as a terrible problem, or fatigued, or just simply aren't very attentive. And the benefit of autonomy is that those trade-offs aren't there. So again, there's a paradigm shift. And it's difficult sometimes for people to accept the shift where the drawbacks with autonomy are different kinds of risk where it's a good performance, a great performance even from autonomy for improving the safety of people driving on the road. But the fact that there are still accidents that happen sometimes or situations that can't be foreseen and that loss of life has happened with essentially a robot at the wheel with autonomous, it's difficult to feel like your fate is being put into the hands of this force that you don't control with ADAS systems. And it might not be very reassuring to know that those stats are working in your favor when you're handing things over to a Waymo or just Tesla Autopilot. But I feel like the benefits of it are fantastic. When I got a vehicle with even just some really basic autonomy, I felt like making long drives was so much less fatiguing. The fact that my role in the driver's seat now is monitoring and supervising a machine that is doing its job and not making every continual micro adjustment to the steering wheel that's necessary. Even just that is a huge benefit. I think very often of the Pareto principle where 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort. And I feel like that definitely applies to vehicle autonomy where that first little 20% of getting the basics in place. It's keep me in my lane. It's going to maintain distance from the vehicle ahead of me. Phew, that's already 80% of the way there. And this is a classic case of getting that last 1% to make autonomy really work so well. You can take the steering wheel off the car. That's incredibly difficult work. But I feel like we've already gained just a huge amount of benefit from that first easy base mark of just letting the vehicle do the dirtiest chores there, just keeping me in the lane.
Yeah, other thing, as you exactly said, these autonomous vehicles, they nicely equidistant from the lines. So they said human driver either will be leaning on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. So effectively, the gap between the cars on two lanes varies from time to time. And then the bit that's sort of I find very interesting, whether we trust or not, or how long it takes us to trust autonomous car, but it would be the most experienced driver. You get into your average Uber, you don't know how long that person is driving. Maybe just got a driver's license, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And who knows, could they have been driving for 14 hours already? And if someone's really trying to make ride sharing work for them, the human system is not always the preferential option here. The robot doesn't get tired. Automation doesn't need breaks. And it's really a benefit that it can be reliable in that way, both for commercial drivers and the Uber from the airport.
What are your worries about slowly AI encroaching us from all around you? Being an engineer and being in this field, you must be very excited, but there must be some in the back of your head also saying, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah, there are benefits and risks and trade-offs with every new technology and with every paradigm shift. And there's so much we could talk about the broader implications of automation on our world and the way that AI is going to change just human effort and human labor in the future. And right, as an engineer, I see the way that this is, I don't want to say creeping into our world because that makes it sound only negative. There are certainly many risks and many negative trade-offs and externalities that happen with automation when you look at it holistically. But the benefits that come with a tool like AI are also incredible. And automation has taken away so many of just the worst jobs in the world. People doing incredibly repetitive tasks in factories, and Midwestern America, where I live, is dramatically reduced. So automation in its earliest days took away a lot of the worst jobs that we had. And we really do have to reckon with what happens when those jobs are taken away. But there's also a way that you can say, hey, people are not having to do these pretty miserable manufacturing jobs anymore. Or I don't think anyone really liked working in a call center. And the fact that now that's being handled by automation, by and large, a benefit, and that kind of miserable work doesn't need to be done anymore. But the trade-offs, when you're on the other end of the phone and that AI agent simply does not understand what you're looking for, or when you worked in a town with a call center that got shut down, those benefits are not being distributed evenly. And the risks and the externalities are being doled out without much consideration for who is shouldering those negative impacts. And I think our culture needs to have a conversation about how we're going to use these powerful tools that we've developed.
Yeah, because you see, when first Google came in, information became free, right? So suddenly everyone has access to everything. And now we are heading towards a world where electricity is free if you already have a solar, the incremental, there's zero cost. And then if you're driving an electric car using that solar, so your kilometer is free, then you have access to an AI, which everyone almost has now. So that means your knowledge is free. So you put all of those things that people used, and then if your energy is free, you can grow food for free. Theoretically, very easy, right? So all these essential things that we have been fighting for or developing technologies for, if you can travel for free, eat for free, and cool and heating for free and knowledge for free, it's a very interesting paradigm shift. So
Yeah.
many dimensions, no?
Yeah. And I want to show some optimism in humanity that
No,
we'll
no, I'm
figure
very
out.
optimistic about
Yeah.
this, but I'm saying it's so much opportunity. What do you do with it?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. I think that as we work on how we cooperate together, because I think so much of human history, you look back and there's this balance between cooperation and competition. And that's the story of life where all the cooperation that has been necessary and that we have achieved in order to make these technologies possible between basic research scientists working in a lab and Bell Laboratories and developing the photovoltaic device, and that coming together with we're stringing wires across our continent in order to distribute energy. But this also happening in a context of economic competition, and that competition driving investment and innovation. But as we get to a point now where the cooperation that's required in order to make these systems work on a broad and global scale, it just becomes more and more difficult, more and more complex to make this all work, not just with the technological systems, but the social systems of how these benefits are going to be distributed, because we have developed a system where that competition has pushed up control of how all these systems work to a vanishingly few. And that's one of the biggest social challenges that we have today. Being able to have free transportation, free distribution of information is utterly fantastic. What a benefit for humanity. And it's just an incredible situation to be in that, hey, we found out that fossil fuels, what pushed us into this position of global rising out of poverty and everything, are also poisoning our planet. The fact that it's even possible for us to have these technologies make the shift, I think is incredible. But it's going to require an immense amount of cooperation in order to see this work out and develop a stable world on the other side of this transition.
Yes, and absolutely. Because I listened to one of the podcasts the other day, and one of the discussion was that people who want to compete, they will use the tools, and some people will not be able to compete. They need to be covered with a universal income of some kind. But whatever shape or take we take, but I think the fossil fuel grip on the society is slowly going, because people at all levels have seen the light. Electric cars had a lot of resistance, solar had, batteries still have. But I think people, with people like yourself saying, hey, I've been driving for 14 years or 10 years, where is the problem? And then people start seeing meaning, because these things are way cheaper, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Solar is
yeah.
cheaper than anything else, and it's free in many cases. Everyone has a roof, right?
Yeah, I think that the economic case for electrification and for the shift to clean energy just makes total sense. The fact that you can put out a solar panel and collect energy and use it for just about anything that you used to need to pay a fuel supplier for, in the general sense, that's incredibly compelling. You have your own asset on your roof or wherever, and you can use it for just about anything. It's incredibly compelling. The challenge that I see with that paradigm shift is who's holding the assets. There's a great new book coming out that I heard an author describing the way that the asset holders of the past system, the folks that are sitting on the oil under the ground or the gas, and the resistance to the shift in energy and distribution is coming largely in part from who holds the old assets, the oil and gas and the production and distribution systems for them, versus who holds the green assets in the future. And how we're going to distribute this, the benefits of the system, and how the asset holders of the existing and past system are going to resist that because of the way that our economic model is set up for a, sad to say, but in many cases, winner take all outcome. It's a challenge, a social challenge for sure for us to figure out. And I'm hoping that we can find our way to compete and collaborate in the right ways in order to push out a cleaner and more just world for everyone.
Yeah, hope we can only hope.
Yeah. Yeah. But like I've told to many people before, just within the niche of electric vehicles, come on in. The water's fine. As a early adopter, making my road trips and getting the solar panels and everything, I can happily report that, hey, the system really does work.
Yes, and then thanks to internet, like if as soon as people take an interest, they can look up anything and everything. So much information out there. Just have to take that interest, saying, okay, I heard it's
Mhm.
easy.
Yeah. That first step is often the hardest. That the journey must begin with a single step, as it has been said. And the curiosity got me into it, the curiosity about the technology and what it will take for people to let that interest shift into action. It will be different for everyone. But now that it's become so common and so easy for people to see their friends, uncles, coworkers benefiting from one aspect or another of the energy transition, I feel like, it will be easy for a lot of people to get on the bandwagon if the systems are there for them to do.
Hope so. Is there anything that I could have asked you or you could have shared?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
learned so much from you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I always have thoughts about technology and charging. I'm a specialist on e-charging in particular, but without getting just too deep down in the rabbit holes of my current fascination is three-phase AC charging for the US market. I'm jealous of what the rest of the world has when they're bringing three-phase power to the vehicle, which is the only sane way to do it. If you look at the situation from the 10,000-foot view, and I'm interested in the way that the NACS transition and the North American market actually might help us bring three-phase power because of the way that the standards are working out. I'm excited about that. So keeping my eye on J3068, but also just really happy to be seeing a lot of the other beneficial transitions that are happening in Europe and in China with fleet electrification and trucking. It's just an exciting time in the industry, even though we're facing a lot of challenges here in the US.
Yes, especially where the largest population of the world is, where you don't need much of a heating or cooling. That just a simple battery, solar, and electric vehicle can really make a big dent on people's lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. And the proliferation of electric power for 2 to 3 wheelers throughout the global south, I think is a great example of that, where rather than having to go and buy fuel and put it in your machine, now that you might be able to put it down and power your motorcycle or whatever it might be, I think is a great benefit.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. How can people reach you? What's the best way to reach you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm just looking up under Ned Funnell, and that's where I post most of my electric vehicle and other unrelated thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's keep in touch and see how things happen. We'll compare notes in few years' time.
That sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs.
If you enjoy this, don't forget the full video is on YouTube. Just search Energypreneurs.
Thank you. See you next time.